this is your first lesson, and it's going to start with a bell problem. This is how I start all of my lessons. And I want you to come up with how to factor this quadratic equation, x squared plus 8x plus 7. Now, how I do my bell problems, I normally have them start with what we learned the previous day to refresh your memory. But since this is the first lesson, I want to see what you remember from previous years. You should have learned how to factor quadratic equations, which is what is stated for the spell problem. So take a moment, factor it, and pause it, and then come back. You should have factored it and remembered, since this is a quadratic equation and there is no number besides 1 out front of your x squared term, you can break it up easily into 2 parentheses. And don't mind the bad handwriting. Okay, you take your first term, since you have 2 x's, and you split it up. And since you have 2 parentheses, that means 1x will go in the first spot of both parentheses. Then you will need 2 numbers that multiply to be 7, but add to be 8. Now when you're finding 2 numbers that multiply to be 7, those are called the factors of 7. And since 7 only has one pair of factors, 1 and 7, those will be the 2 numbers that we use. So plug in 1 and 7 into our parentheses and we're done. So the factor form of x squared plus 8x plus 7 is x plus 1 and x plus 7. The first section we're going to do, we're going to start right at the beginning of the book, 1.1, Patterns and Expressions. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to identify and describe patterns. The 3 vocab words that you should write down on your Chapter 1 vocab sheet are variable, a symbol, usually a letter, that represents one or more numbers. The most common variable that you should be familiar with is x. The second one, numerical expression, is a mathematical phrase that contains numbers and operation symbols, like 2 minus 3. An algebraic expression is a mathematical phrase that contains one or more variables, x plus 3. Now these are just examples. The first part of this is identifying a pattern. If you look at our first example on the left-hand side, you should notice that we're trying to identify the pattern and then draw the next figure. Hopefully you recognize the first figure is a triangle, which has 3 sides. The next figure is a quadrilateral, which has 4 sides. The next one is a pentagon, which has 5. And the last one that is drawn is a hexagon, which means it has 6 sides. So if you notice, starting with the first figure, going to the next, we add 1 side, and then add another, then add another. So our pattern would be you add 1 side from the previous figure. So to draw the next figure, you must draw a 7-sided figure. The diagram on the right, if you notice, in each diagram or each figure there is a middle box that is red, and then it's surrounded by yellow boxes on every side. You identify the pattern and draw the next figure. The next example is determining how many toothpicks are in the 20th figure using a process column. If you notice, the first column is the figure number or input. So the number 1 represents the first figure. We made 1 square. The process column shows that in our first figure we used 4 toothpicks, so our number of toothpicks used was 4. Then going to your second and your third, etc. So if you notice, every time we add a square to our figure, we add 4 toothpicks, because there are 4 sides to a square. So in the process column, down at the bottom, n represents any number of sides. So to represent that in the process column, we'll take n, any number of sides, and we multiply that by 4. That will also go over here, because we get the same number. So it asks you how many toothpicks are in the 20th figure. You take n, which is the number of what figure you're on, multiply that by 4, and you should get 80. So there are 80 toothpicks in the 20th figure. The next example, you want to set up an aquarium and you need to determine what size tank to buy. The graph shows tank sizes using a rule, that relates the capacity of the tank to the combined lengths of the fish it can hold. If you want 5 2-inch goldfish, 4 1-inch guppies, and a 3-inch clownfish, which is the smallest capacity tank that you can buy, 15, 20, or 25 gallon. To determine this, you have to look at our graph over here, and we have to figure out what is the total length of the fish that we want to buy. So if we're buying 5 2-inch goldfish, that will be 10 total inches. If we're buying 4 1-inch guppies, that will be 4. And we're buying 1 3-inch clownfish. So if we add up our total length, we will get 17 for our total length. So if you go over here and you notice if 17 is not on our graph, we have to estimate it. So you have to figure out the pattern. If we notice at 2 inches, we have to have a 4-gallon tank. And if we notice at 4 inches, we have to have a 6-gallon tank. And at 6 inches, we have to have an 8-gallon tank. If you notice, every time we're going up by 2 inches, we're going up by 2 gallons for our tank. So if we have 17 inches, that means we at least have to have a 19-gallon tank, which means 15 is too small, 25 is way too big, we'd have to buy a 20-gallon tank. This next one, we have to also describe a pattern using words. And if you notice, our first figure we have 1, and then we add a dot to the top and to the left. Then the next one we add another one and another one. Okay, so our next figure, we should have 5 dots going across here and 5 going up and down. I'm not going to draw that because it won't come out very pretty. And the last one, what is the 7th number in this pattern? We have to first determine what is our pattern with these numbers. When we look at it, we should see the difference between 8 and 13 is 5, the same thing with 13 and 18, and the same thing with 23. So our next number, we have to add 5, and we get 28. Add 5 again, and we get 33. And that is our 6th number, so if we add 5 again, we'll get our 7th, which will be H38. This is the end of our lesson. This is the homework that we will be working on in class tomorrow, as well as some other activities. But if you will not be in class because you are absent, please do this homework and come to class prepared, ready to talk about it.